The pounding on my apartment door at 1 in the morning ripped me from a restless sleep. I stumbled through the dark living room of my Chicago high-rise, heart racing, wondering who the hell would show up like this. When I swung the door open, there stood Patrick, my college roommate I hadn't seen in 5 years, soaked to the bone from the pouring rain, his blue eyes desperate and haunted. "Kenneth," he said, voice cracking, "I have nowhere else to go tonight. Please." I let him in without a second thought, grabbing a towel from the bathroom while he stood dripping on my hardwood floor. We hadn't talked much since graduation, just the occasional text or like on social media. He looked thinner, more tired, but the same warm smile that had made our late-night study sessions in college feel like the best part of the day. As I made coffee in the kitchen, the silence hung heavy. "What happened, Patrick?" I asked, handing him the mug. He took it with shaking hands. "I left LA. My job. Everything fell apart. But that's not the real reason I'm here. I can't keep this in anymore. Kenneth, I'm gay. I've been in love with you since college." The words hit me like a truck. I stared at him, the coffee mug in my hand suddenly too heavy. Patrick, the guy who'd been my wingman through every bad breakup with girls, the one who'd always been there for me. Gay? In love with me? It didn't make sense. "You're joking, right?" I managed to say, but his eyes told me he wasn't. We sat on the couch as the rain hammered the windows, and he started talking. He told me about the nights in our dorm when he'd lie awake listening to me talk about my dates, how every laugh we shared felt like more to him than friendship. He said he'd dated women back then to hide it, even joined the same fraternity to stay close. The guilt had eaten at him for years, but after losing his job and watching a close friend come out only to lose his family, he realized he couldn't carry the secret anymore. I listened, my mind spinning through memories I thought were just buddy moments. The way he'd always pick me up after fights with girlfriends, the long drives where we'd talk about dreams until sunrise. Was there something there I missed? Anger bubbled up first. "Why now? Why dump this on me after all this time?" I snapped, standing up and pacing the room. Patrick didn't flinch. "Because I saw your last post about being single again, and it hit me that life is too short to keep pretending. I don't expect anything, Kenneth. I just needed you to know the truth." We talked until the sky lightened, sharing stories of our families back in Texas. The conservative values we'd both grown up with that made any other path feel impossible. By the time we finally crashed on the couch, exhaustion pulling us under, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Something inside was cracking open, and I didn't know how to close it. The morning light filtered through the blinds, turning the living room golden and exposing everything we'd left unsaid the night before. I woke first, staring at Patrick curled on the other end of the couch, his face peaceful for the first time since he'd arrived. The confession replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't pause. "I'm gay. I've been in love with you since college. My straight life, the girlfriends, the plans I'd made for a wife and kids one day, suddenly felt like a costume I'd been wearing without realizing it was ill-fitting. I made breakfast quietly, eggs and toast, trying to act normal, but my hands shook as I set the plates down. Patrick stirred, sitting up with a wary smile. "Morning. You didn't kick me out." "That's a start." We ate in silence at first, then he reached into his bag and pulled out an old notebook, the one from our junior year creative writing class. "Remember this? I wrote something I never showed you." He flipped to a page where he'd sketched me during a lecture, the lines soft and full of something I couldn't name then. I was trying to tell myself it was just admiration. But looking back, it was more. The page blurred as I read his notes in the margin. "Kenneth makes everything feel possible. Wish he knew." My chest tightened. "You kept this all these years?" He nodded. "It was my way of holding on without risking our friendship." That morning stretched into hours of honest talk. I admitted the times I'd felt jealous when he dated girls in college, how I'd brush it off as protectiveness. "Maybe I wasn't as straight as I thought," I whispered, the words tasting foreign but true. Patrick didn't push. He just listened, offering space I didn't know I needed. I asked him to stay a few more days, at least until he figured out his next move. We walked the Chicago streets that afternoon, the city buzzing around us, and for the first time, the air between us felt charged with possibility instead of secrets. But doubts crept in by evening. What would my family say if they knew? My parents in Texas still sent me church bulletins every week. And my job at the marketing firm, where guys joked about that lifestyle in the break room, suddenly felt like a minefield. Patrick sensed it. "You don't have to decide anything today, Kenneth. I'm just glad I told you." As night fell again, I lay awake wondering if this was the start of something beautiful or the end of the life I'd always known. Days turned into a week, and Patrick settled into the guest room like he'd never left. We fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and brand new. Coffee in the mornings, long talks over dinner about the years we'd missed. He opened up about the pressure he'd felt growing up, the way his father had drilled "real men don't cry" into him, making any hint of different feelings something to bury deep. I shared my own buried doubts, the way I'd always chosen safe girlfriends who never quite reached my heart. One evening, we watched an old movie from our college days, and when his hand brushed mine on the couch, neither of us pulled away. It was simple, electric, and terrifying. Work became harder to focus on. My boss noticed my distraction during a big campaign meeting, pulling me aside to ask if everything was okay at home. I lied, saying it was just family stuff, but inside, the identity crisis was building. I started researching online late at night, reading stories of men like me who'd spent years denying who they were. Patrick never pressured me for more than friendship, but his presence made everything clearer. "You've always been the one who got me, Kenneth," he said one night over pizza. Even when I tried to run from it, we laughed about old pranks, but underneath was a tenderness that made my pulse race. Then the first misunderstanding hit. A text from my ex-girlfriend popped up while Patrick was nearby, and he misread my quick reply as lingering feelings. "It's fine if you're not ready," he said quietly, retreating to his room. I followed, explaining it was over, but the moment revealed how fragile this new ground was. We talked it through until dawn, and in that honesty something shifted. I realized I didn't want him to leave. The next day, I called my sister in Texas, testing the waters with vague questions about acceptance. Her casual "as long as you're happy" gave me a spark of hope, but I knew the full truth would test everything. The cracks widened when my parents announced a surprise visit to Chicago for my birthday. Patrick offered to stay at a hotel, but I insisted he remain, wanting him there as my best friend at least. The dinner started fine, stories of home and how proud they were of my stable life. But when Dad asked about dating, and I hesitated, Patrick jumped in smoothly, changing the subject. Later that night, after they left for their hotel, the weight hit me. "They wouldn't understand," I told Patrick, pacing the kitchen. He nodded, sharing his own story of coming out to his brother years ago and losing contact for months. "It's not just about us, Kenneth. It's about the world we grew up in." The conversation turned deep, revealing layers of sacrifice we'd both made to fit in. I admitted the fear of losing my family, the job security that came with blending in. Patrick confessed a past betrayal, a college fling he'd hidden that ended in heartbreak when the guy chose the closet over him. Work added fuel to the fire. A coworker overheard me on a call with Patrick and made a snide remark in the break room about late-night visitors. The humiliation burned, but instead of laughing it off like old Kenneth would, I confronted him quietly, defending my space. That night, Patrick and I sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, and I felt the first real pull toward choosing authenticity. "Maybe it's time I stopped living for everyone else," I said. He reached for my hand, and this time I held it. The misunderstanding from earlier lingered though, and when Patrick suggested he might head back to LA for a job lead, I felt the panic of losing him. We argued gently, words laced with care rather than anger, and in the resolution, we both saw the growing bond for what it was. Not just friendship, but the start of something deeper that demanded courage. The climax came faster than I expected. My parents extended their stay, and during a family brunch, My father found an old photo on my phone of Patrick and me laughing close on the couch. "What's this about?" he demanded, voice tight with the same tone he'd used when I skipped church as a teen. The room went silent. Patrick stood beside me, steady but pale. I could have lied, said it was nothing, but the years of hiding finally broke me. "Dad, Patrick's more than a friend. He's the person who makes me feel seen." The words hung there, raw and irreversible. My mother gasped. My father shook his head, muttering about choices and sin. Patrick stepped forward, calm but firm. "I love your son, sir. Not as a phase, but as the man he is." The confrontation escalated, old prejudices clashing with the truth I'd finally embraced. They left angry, promising to pray for me, and the door closing felt like a chapter slamming shut. Patrick blamed himself, offering to disappear to spare me the fallout. "I never wanted to cost you your family, Kenneth." His sacrifice hit hardest, showing the depth of his care. I refused, pulling him into a quiet hug that said more than words. Work turned toxic too, the rumor spreading until my boss called me in for a talk about professionalism. I defended myself and Patrick without apology, even as it risked my promotion. The betrayal from a supposed friend who leaked the gossip stung, but it forced me to see who stood by me. Through sleepless nights of doubt and tears, we supported each other, sharing vulnerabilities that strengthened the bond. By the end of that week, as I drove Patrick to the airport for his interview, I knew the choice was clear. Love like this wasn't a burden. It was the awakening I'd needed all along. Weeks later, with my parents still distant but sending cautious texts, and a new job offer that let me work remotely, Patrick returned from LA with good news. We stood in the same apartment where it all began, the city skyline glowing at dusk. "I don't want to do this without you," he said simply. I took his hands, the man who'd once been my secret, now my anchor. "Then don't. We're in this together." The months that followed were filled with small victories. Quiet dinners where we talked openly about our fears, weekends visiting supportive friends, and the slow rebuilding of family ties when my sister reached out first. Patrick taught me it was okay to grieve the old life while building the new one. I learned to face the world's stares with quiet pride, no longer ashamed of who I loved. Our bond grew through every misunderstanding we resolved and every sacrifice we shared, proving that true connection demanded courage but gave back strength. The journey wasn't perfect. There were nights I questioned if the pain was worth it, but waking beside Patrick, seeing the peace in his eyes, reminded me it was. We'd come from the same small-town roots, carried the same weights, and chosen to set them down together. In the end, the overnight guest who changed everything became the partner who helped me become the man I was always meant to be. Was hiding your true self ever the right choice if it meant losing the chance to love openly? True or false?